Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Motogp Xtra podcast. This week, the MotoGP circus headed to Sachsenring for the German Grand Prix. I'm Rhys, and joining me as usual to discuss the events of the weekend is Dylan, aka Dill469. Now, probably the first thing to touch upon is obviously Moto3, as always, start with Moto3, but the first thing that actually really stood out to us was the conditions for the Moto3 race. So it was unusually hot for a Moto3 race, and this leads in to stuff we're going to talk about later. But it was ridiculously hot, wasn't it, Dylan?
Yeah, for most of the weekend, it was pretty record temperatures, global warming kicking in hard. Apparently 2015 was very similar, but not as close to it. But they said in the 90 years they've been there, it's probably the hottest it's ever been. And usually Moto3 being the first race of the day, it's hot. Like it's anywhere in Europe, France, Spain, Italy, wherever you go at 10 in the morning. It's still going to be warm, but it's not conditions that you'd see in Moto2 and GP. And I think that caught a lot of people out. There was a lot of big crashes, a lot of strange crashes that you don't usually see in a Moto3 race. Scott Ogden had a high side, Anshu nearly high sided. Just some weird crashes that you don't really see just because probably track temperature being extra couple of degrees catching a few people out. And that kind of altered the race. It kind of broke it up. Usually everyone can ride maybe 95% of their race pace and the slipstream will keep them there. But it broke into many gaps. We had a runaway leader. We had a 4 or 5 man battle that kind of got smaller and smaller as the race went on for the podium. There was a battle for the top 10. It kind of broke up into small little groups ever on track. There wasn't a massive battle anywhere. And I think that was down to the unusually hot temperatures from Moto3. And overall, it was a dull race because of that. I think it made it very difficult for people to battle. And it was a fairly attritional race overall.
Yeah, it was. It's actually funny you should mention 2015 there because it was quite a similar race to the Moto3 race back then. It was actually Danny Kent on that occasion that pulled away and won that race. Obviously similar to what happened with Guevara this weekend. Obviously it's absolutely pulled away from the rest of the pack. It did feel a bit more like a Moto2 race really, because just all the gaps forming like you say. But you spoke of some crashes. Probably the most notable crash was Carlos Tatai at turn 1. Did his best Takaki Nakagami impression, flying into the first corner. It was way too loud on the brakes, so late, just completely wiped out poor old Ricardo Rossi, and then John McPhee had to pick up and run through the gravel to avoid that crash. So ruined 2 riders' races right there, and then obviously his own as well. So a bit of a careless move there from Carlos Tatai, I thought.
Yeah, you know it's bad when the rider has broke so late that he turns in so aggressive that he actually cuts the track on the inside to try and brake later. He actually went over the white line on the inside, if you watch back it, to try and find some more track to brake. And he's actually lucky there's only 2 people kind of got affected. That could have been 5-6 riders being skittled. He just gets it all wrong. For whatever reason, he makes it kind of a bad start, and I reckon he just tries to brake a fraction later and gets it all wrong. And unfortunately, he skittled a few people, ruined his own race, and John McPhee ended up being 30 seconds behind last place. He actually got back to almost scoring points. He was battling back quite well. He had good race pace, which was a shame because he's more of an experienced rider. It would have been good to see what he could have done in a bit of a difficult, hot and sweaty Moto3 race. But overall, I reckon a double long lap penalty is on the way for the, what would you call him, the aggressor into turn 1.
The bowling ball. Yeah, I think there probably will be some penalty. As of now, I don't believe anything's been announced because they were going to review it after the race, which, yeah, kind of fair enough because the aggressor at the time was out of the race. Obviously, McPhee, you can't really do anything for him. He's miles behind, so it's not like it's going to affect anything. So once the aggressor's out, I suppose you can easily push it back. You may as well focus on what's going on. So we haven't heard anything as of yet in terms of a penalty, but I would be very surprised to not see one. But you know what the stewards are like. Nakagami escaped penalty last weekend. So, I know it was probably a bit more serious crash for him, and he obviously didn't get back on the bike and try and continue like Tatai did. But even still, similar kind of move, really. So you'd expect to see some sort of penalty there. So it just led to a bit of a weird race after that one. Somebody that I noticed was underperforming quite a bit was actually Yama Masia. All weekend didn't really seem like he was there. I think he may have also been sort of caught up in the turn 1 crash because there was a Red Bull bike that ran wide to turn 1 as well, sort of avoiding some of the carnage on the inside. I think maybe one of the Honda Team Asia riders also ran a little wide, not actually off the circuit, but they both ran wide. So I think it actually might have been Masia that ran wide there because all the other bikes, Holgado, Onshu, and Fernandez, were a lot further up the order. So yeah, for a title contender, not great for Messi. He was building up a bit of form, but the last couple of races, he's not quite been so strong.
Yeah, I think the summer break is coming at a good time for Messi. He had a very good run of performances after a bit of a shaky start once again. And he looked like he was putting on a serious threat to the championship, and he looked like he had a proper good go at it. Then over the last couple of rounds, he's just gone a bit cold. And again, getting caught up, and you would expect even getting caught up in a turn one kind of incident, losing a few positions, losing a bit of time, you'd still expect a rider of his experience, his talent, that team, that bike really around that track, you'd expect it to pull it back. But he struggled all weekend. The race was no different. Assen, he's been good there before. He'll need a good solid podium in my opinion to go into the summer break, a 5-week summer break, where he'll be have a time to reflect on the first half of the season. So it's critical for Messia, in my opinion, to have a very strong weekend next weekend in Assen before they head away for the break, because after a couple of bad rounds, you don't want to have a third round of bounce, because that will just weigh you down for the few weeks you're off. It'll be in your head, you'll be thinking about it, you'll come back probably a little more stressed than you should be. Moto3 at the moment there actually is about 4 riders that are consistent. You have the 2 gases, you have of course Messia, and you have Fadji, who is pace but is kind of up and down and everywhere at the moment. So if he can be consistently there, there's no reason why he can't bring the championship down to the last few rounds against either one of the gas boys. But he's having too many of these weekends. Even though he was on a great run, race wins, podiums, thereabout, good qualifying, he didn't have them usual weekends where he would be nowhere like he did a couple of years there in a row. So he needs to get the head on, get back on the horse for Assen, and hopefully it'll be good for the championship if he won in Assen, then went into summer break with a nice kind of relaxed, refreshed comeback, and then we can have a good battle for the second half of the season.
Yeah, he does need to really try and build himself some momentum. But speaking of people that were building momentum, we may as well go back to Guevara. We did touch on him briefly, but what a weekend he's had. 2 race wins in a row, and in a very similar fashion, just he had the pace. He's very much given me sort of Martin vibes from when he won the championship, that he was just doing the laps on his own all weekend. He can qualify well then with that, and then he can, once he gets to the front of a race, he could put a couple of quick laps in and just pull away. Martin did that very well on his way to the Moto3 title, and I've got to say, Guevara putting himself in the driving seat, of course, not actually leading the championship currently, but very close to his teammate Garcia. I think the championship is mainly between those two, but like you say, if Messia can improve a little bit, and Fogger as well, I think it is probably still a 4-rider fight. But Guevara really putting himself in the driving seat, and he's going to be really building some good momentum into the summer break, because if he has another good race in Assen, the others are going to be worried about him, and he's just going to be really, really happy. We knew that this was going to come from Guevara at some point, but it's amazing.
Yeah, he's still so young as well, and he's getting such a good run of form together. I believe he's actually quicker overall than his teammate Garcia. I think Garcia is just a better racer overall. I think Garcia has probably the best racecraft in Moto3. I think if it was just a straight sprint, straight like time attack, I think Guevara just pips him. He seems to have some serious pace, especially when he's on his own. He's takes a lot of high corner speed, just great riding style, just rides the Moto3 bike perfectly on his own. In a battle, he's quite good. He's not like Fadji where he kind of gets beaten up as much. He can give it as much as he can take it. But then you just lead towards Garcia being that clever fox in the little battle. So it'll be interesting to see how the championship goes, because if Guevara can keep pulling away and just disappearing into the horizon, he could rack up a serious amount of points in a few races. But then again, if we go with Assen, it's probably going to be 10, 12, 14 bikes battling for the win. And then you kind of think that's a Garcia type of race. So my 2 championship favourites in Moto3 at the moment are the Gas boys. And it could go either way. Like I said, one's quicker, one has better racecraft. And it's a bit of an interesting one. It's a good watch though. There are 2 good riders and they're right at the top of their game.
Yeah, most certainly. It does seem like the Aspar boys are in good stead in, to be honest, both Moto3 and Moto2, which we'll move on to now. Seems like almost Moto2 and Moto3 have been swapped a little bit, because Moto2 was a bit more hectic in terms of some of the battling going on, whereas Moto3 was a bit more spread out. Moto2 was still sort of spread out as it usually is, but the actual groups seemed a bit better, but that maybe was just compared to Moto3, because we're used to seeing that with Moto2, so I suppose they're used to that situation a little bit more. But probably the biggest talking point of the weekend was Celestino Vietti struggling all weekend. It did look like it was just going to be one of those weekends for him where, as usual, to be honest, he's made a bit of a habit of this it this year. He's kind of started slow on a Friday, built up, gone through Q1 on a Saturday, done a decent time in Q2, and then come through and even won the race. So we saw him do that last week. So it looked like it's going to be one of those weekends for him, but it never ticked on. He never made that step. He just seemed to be where he was on Friday the whole weekend. He just struggled all weekend and then crashed actually fighting a fellow VR46 bike, the VR46 Master Camp team, which was nice to see Manu Gonzalez up there, actually, to be honest. I will admit that. But he had a crash trying to battle with that bike, and yeah, just a bit of a disaster for him, really, because he was behind all those contenders anyway. But then to crash, just lose those few points he was going to pick up.
Yeah, for the race, it felt like for Vietti, it was like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. He'd make a pass, then he'd get passed by 2 people, then he'd make a pass, then he'd go backwards again. He never seemed to be able to make steady progress. He was battling for most of the race outside the top 10. A few times he got into the top 10, then would go backwards again. It was, again, it's an old oddball of a track, Sachsenring. It's so much on the edge of the tyre. There's not many heavy braking zones, which, to be honest, I think is Vietti is strong. He seems very good at pulling it down to an apex. And unfortunately, that was his downfall today in Sachsenring, crashing in turn 1. Tricky corner. But nonetheless, didn't really lose much points. It could have been worse. If you look at previous races, when in Texas he crashed out of P2, that was a big point haul he lost. At best, he probably would have got 5 points today. It probably isn't going to be the end of the world for the championship. Now, it could come back to bite him. People have lost championships for losing P11s and P12s before, and it'll happen again in the future, no doubt. But he was having a tough weekend. He clearly didn't have the race pace, wasn't comfortable, was probably a bit over the limit, probably trying too much to make up too much time into turn 1, and pretty much cost himself potentially critical 5 or 6 points.
Yeah, just he didn't seem to have it, and like you say, I suppose he didn't fall out of too high of a position, but those points still count. And really, he probably could have picked up a few points because his other rivals, well, his other main rivals coming into the weekend, weren't doing too well. Agora and Canet, they were both struggling quite a bit. Of course, Canet, again, picked up more injury. Obviously, unfortunately, he was in a car accident before the weekend. Fortunately, he and his girlfriend are okay, and everybody involved is fine because it was just their car in the accident, as far as I'm aware. But that, again, just another setback for Canet, more injury. It looked like he had an issue in qualifying with his nose. It looked like he just had a constant nosebleed. He couldn't stop, which was obviously no good for him. Agora just looked to be struggling. He seems to have dropped off the ball a little bit. So, maybe something's not happening behind the scenes, but perhaps the Idemitsu team as a whole are struggling a little because both him and Chantra seem to have dropped off a fair amount the last few weekends. So the main 2 rivals for Vietti there weren't doing too well. So if he just picked up a few points, he could, it would have probably been good enough. But those guys struggling and not being able to actually capitalize on Vietti there, they didn't have the pace. I mean, Vietti didn't have the pace, but they had more pace than him. But they weren't up there, finishing on the podium when Vietti crashed out. I mean, that could absolutely have changed the championship if they were there, but they just weren't.
Yeah, the thing I look at Agora, I think he gets every weekend he gets the most out of his package. Again, no, this weekend he wasn't by any means on the race winning pace, but he still managed to make overtakes. He went forward in the race and obviously gained points. But with Vietti, I feel like he is more likely to crash. Canet, of course, with his injury, he actually had to ride with nose plugs in because his nose was bleeding that much. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of his injury, but he got a bit of a whack to his head. He was unconscious in the crash, and I presume he got a bit of a smack or something to the nose area. Probably has a bit of some sort of fracture in there, considering all the nosebleeds. He did actually crash on, I don't know if it was Friday, it must have been Saturday, I believe. It was crashed into turn 1 and he put it down to his nosebleed. He said it just was too much of a distraction, which is something I've never heard from a Grand Prix rider before, which is an interesting one. Cannon again after the race looked like he had been through the ringer. Every race this year he gets to the end and he just looks like he's just gone through a war. He keeps getting himself in these issues where he's unfit for races. It's going to bite him that he's going to eventually keep giving away points. If he was fully fit, no doubt he probably would have been closer to the podium. Same could have been said for the last few rounds after of course, the Portimao crash was a very freak accident. There's nothing he could have done, but it feels like Canet is always slightly injured. There's always something when he's never fully race fit or race ready. And I think that will halter his progress over the year, especially up against Iogora, who touch wood, doesn't make many mistakes. He seems to get 99% out of the package every Sunday and brings home a good chunk of points.
Yeah, just like you said, can it is making a bit of a habit of being unfit. Seems like it always just keeps being unfortunate incidents for him as well. But yeah, he really needs to just turn up to a weekend without any injuries, and I'm sure he'll be right up there as he's still chasing that first Moto2 win for him as well. But we'll move on to the race winner of this race, someone that kind of was a championship contender before, but it's sort of come out of nowhere because his start to the season was quite poor. I mean, if you remember back to Indonesia, he fell off at the first corner there. To be fair, he was up there in Qatar. I mean, he wasn't battling for the race win, but he was battling for the podium, which is what you'd expect for an IO bike. I haven't really seen him all year. Obviously, he won the race back in Le Mans. Obviously, the two IO bikes were dominant there. He managed to put it on the podium again in Catalonia, so he's picked up some form. And all of a sudden, a crash for Vietti, bit of a poor race for Agora and Canet, a win for Augusto Fernandez, and he's right up there. He's battling for this championship again all of a sudden. So quite a surprise there. I didn't realise he was actually that close to the top guys. I'd already sort of ruled him out, but seems like Augusto Fernandez, if he can keep this performance up, very reminiscent of the IA performance from last year because he was a good 8 seconds up the road. You don't see that. That's ridiculous. That's like Marc Marquez kind of performance at Sachsenring. So yeah, that's a bit of a shock for Fernandez there, but amazing ride, and he's brought himself back into the championship.
Yeah, he was 37 points off the championship lead before the race today. Obviously, Vietti crashing and him winning, it's down to 12 points. It's something crazy that he's managed to put it back that much in one race. It's unheard of, really. Whether he'll be able to do it for a full season, I don't know. I always think he'll show up for 3 races a year, and I think we just could be going through that patch at the moment. He has so much pace. He's shown it throughout many seasons, but he doesn't seem to be able to put a full season together, which is a massive, massive frustration for himself personally, I'd say. But also the fact he's in the IO team. There's a lot of riders. I look at Remy Gardner throughout his Moto2 career. He was on the Tech 3 years and years back. He would show, again, kind of the same thing. He'd show maybe 4 races a year that he could do it. The rest of them, he'd be battling for P18, and you'd be kind of going, geez, like, what's happening there? And then he went to the IO squad and was there every week. Whatever they did to him, whatever buttons they pressed, they managed to get him to be P3, P2, P4, P3, P1, P1, P2. Always there. Rarely made crashes, rarely made mistakes. And I thought Augusto in that team, like, yeah, that's what's going to happen. He's going to be there every Sunday. He'll probably qualify top 6 each week. He'll probably bag a podium every second weekend. He'll be there. But unfortunately, didn't start that well. He kind of was a bit misfiery, and he slightly seems to have picked up his form now. But the question is, will he be able to carry it into Assen through the summer break and come back and actually genuinely push the likes of Vietti, Agora and Canet for the title?
Yeah, it's just going to be one of those things where, like you say, of course he does show up. Another track where he's very good, though, is Assen, which is the next round, so this could continue his title charge. And we were speaking a lot about momentum in Moto3, so maybe he could bring some momentum into the summer break. But behind the dominant race leader, there was actually a pretty good fight for the podium. So Sam Lowes, Pedro Acosta, and Marcel Schrotter, obviously the home favourite. The fans were absolutely cheering for him every lap. You could hear it on the TV some laps. That's how much they were absolutely cheering for him, especially through sort of the bowl, the stadium section. They were really going for it. And it was a great battle between those guys. Schrotter was on the podium at the start of the race. He did get demoted off it by Acosta, but he was right there till the very end, battling with Lowes and Acosta. Great battle there. Sam actually, for once, looked pretty comfortable. He made a small error that lost him the position initially to Acosta, but he was raring for it. He was amazing through some of those left-handers. He was gaining yards on everybody. He was the fastest guy through there by a good way. He looked like he was going to be completely out of contention on that last lap to battle Acosta. Gave it a go, a little bit of contact going into the last corner between the two of them. Just one of those things, wasn't dirty or anything like that. It was just Acosta coming back off the curb because, of course, you crash if you stayed on the curb because it becomes grass at some point. And he was coming back off the race line, a little bit of touching. Sam wasn't bothered. He still got the podium. So a great battle for the podium there. What did you think to that good scrap?
Yeah, it was actually at one point Sam was in P2. He got passed, went back to P3, then got passed by Schrotter, and I was like, he's over, he's done for it. There's no way he's getting back into this. Because the Sector 1, Sam looked strong, and then the uphill left-handers all the way back to about turn 8. And then there was just these 3 corners in a row. There was the 2 lefts before the waterfall, and then the waterfall where he was just head and shoulders quicker than anyone else. So you would kind of look at him from, especially a lot of helicopter footage of it, and you were looking at him going, there's no way he's going to get close enough to be able to make a pass. Like, surely he's half a second. And you would just see the gap shrink as they got through the 2 lefts before the waterfall. And every lap, without doubt, he'd pull it back. And that actually was key to his race, because that was the reason why he was able to make a few moves. He made a lovely move into the top of the waterfall on Costa. He just managed it up. But the only thing about Costa, school of Valentino, I'd say, he just snaps back every time, doesn't leave you get in any rhythm. And that is pretty much how Acosta got the second place. I was watching him, and I never felt that Sam had enough to beat Acosta P2, even though I think he might have been quicker, but Acosta would just snap back. He'd get past, but then also like repassed in the same braking zone. It was always an interesting one. Acosta always doing some interesting moves on a bike, but a bit of a heartbreak for Schrotter in the end, not to get the podium. He was there, made a mistake coming out of Saxon curve, just went wide, allowed Sam back through, and that unfortunately was his only opportunity to get the podium. Sam was a bit too quick in the final few laps, P4, but he did get a great reception throughout the whole weekend, which is good to see for the home rider.
Yeah, it's always a nice story when someone does pretty well at home, because Schrotter's one of those riders that he's kind of there or thereabouts. He's always floating in the top 10, and he has the odd race a season where he fights for the podium, and it's good that he had one of those at home. He does tend to go pretty well at Sachsenring, to be fair. The German riders always seem to, except obviously Bradl in MotoGP, not quite. But usually, on the whole, you get pretty good performances from the Germans at home. But we'll move on to the MotoGP race now then. And again, it seems like these races all have kind of things in common, with someone being a dominant winner, one of the championship rivals having a bad weekend. It just all seemed to be, they were just copy-pastes of each other. It was very, very strange. So the first major point really is another crash for Bagnaia. And I think you've got to say at this point, is championship over? Because that's now, what, three retirements in the last 5. I think he's had a first DNF. So yeah, it's not. That's pretty much it for Bagnaia, because he was already behind going into that period anyway. He needed to get a lot of points because he had a really poor start to the season, and this is it. It was such an innocuous little crash. Really lost the rear, but he was clearly pushing on. You saw the aggression earlier on in the lap when he tried to. Well, earlier on in the race, or the previous lap, when he was trying to pass Fabio because Fabio had got the start. So a bit of desperation for Bagnaia. Another mistake under pressure, and I think that definitely is his campaign over now.
Yeah, I think with Pecco, that first race, crashed Qatar, he was always on the back foot. I think he's always been kind of catching and chasing his tail since that race. They came out in Qatar, Ducati, and said that they've made him do too much testing, that he came to the race weekend not knowing what bike he was going to ride, and there was just too much confusion. They apologised for it, which is something you'd rarely hear from Ducati, apologising to riders over the way they're handling their development. But from then, he had a crash there, and then you were going, oh no, that's a terrible start. And then it went on and on and on. Then he crashes again, or then he wins the race, maybe. Oh, he's crashed again, and then he's crashed again. So for me, there's no way back. He'll win races this year. He'll show why that GP22 is probably the best bike on the grid. He'll show why he's one of the top riders in the class, but he's not going to challenge for the title this year. It's gone at this point. He was actually, funny enough, we'll get to Quartararo in a minute, but last year Quartararo won it, and I was like, yeah, he was deserving, but if Bagnaia had a better start, he probably wouldn't have done it. He was just probably quicker than Quartararo. And then this year coming in, everyone was either picking Marquez for the title or Bagnaia, and very few people were giving Quartararo any chance of retaining his title. And look how that's gone. Marquez is out for a whole season, and Pecco has thrown away 3 podiums. Just madness, really. It's just, there's small mistakes he's being punished for, but again, bad start to season, he can't really afford to sit there and just take the results like Quartararo could, and unfortunately he's paying for the price of that now.
Yeah, it's interesting you say going into the championship, Bagnaia was probably one of the favourites. Everyone was saying Bagnaia and Marquez, and kind of leaving Quartararo out, which was one of those things where you think it's weird, because it wasn't like he just won last year being consistent. He absolutely dominated some races, but it's the back half of the season. he didn't quite seem to have it. But it's almost as if he was that far ahead. He knew he didn't need to win, and he just took the positions. Because once again today, that's 3 races he's won this season now, all in the same fashion, dominance from the front. That's how you win a race on a Yamaha, to be honest. But Quartararo, once again, fantastic race. Didn't put a foot wrong. He knew what he needed to do. He actually, he took his brain out for qualifying because he knew he needed to start on the front row. That's what it seems like with this Yamaha. If you actually have clean air, we've been saying it for years, you can do the lap times. And if you start off well, you can pull away. And that's how Quartararo wins all his races. But the difference is, of course, he can actually make passes. The other Yamahas seem to struggle a lot with that. But again, Quartararo just miles ahead of everybody. Definitely the best rider on the grid, if you ask me. The Yamaha, probably not quite as bad of a bike as the others make it seem, to be completely honest. But it also seems like one of those bikes where you have to ride it in a specific way to get the absolute maximum out of it. And you've got to start high up. But again, just flawless for him. And again, he's miles in front now. I think he's got 34 points, something like that, leading the championship now. Maybe even slightly more, because I think I remember saying that during the race. So, yeah, it's kind of looking like he's becoming the favourite now. He's even starting to gap Aleix. Aleix is going to have to start winning some races if he wants to beat him, because taking those third, fourth places, just not going to be enough against Fabio in his current form.
Yeah, the 3 races Fabio has won this year have been pretty much identical. He's gotten a good start, he got to the front, and he wasn't repassed by Ducati, and then he cleared off. Simple as that. He has not started P9 in one race. He hasn't started on pole, did a Maverick drop back to 6th, and then the last third of the race was the second half quicker than everyone. He has started well, usually led by the end of the first lap, and then got 1 to 2 seconds lead, and then just managed it the whole race. Lorenzo-esque, just went round and round, hit his apexes, hit his markers, and that's the only way you can win on a Yamaha. Now, the only thing I would say is he had races like Mandalika where he did fight back in tricky conditions. Mugello, fighting Ducatis at their home track. Obviously, he didn't manage to beat Pecco that day, but second place on a Yamaha at Mugello is pretty much a victory in my eyes. He is head and shoulders above everyone. I'm not too sure how good that bike is, because if you look at the 4 riders, so you say arguably Quartararo, well, not arguably, he's the best in the world right now, pretty much end off. Frankie Morbidelli has potential to be one of the best. We don't know how much of his injury is still plaguing him. Now, over the years, you hear riders, Miguel Oliveira, for example, he crashed after the summer break last year, high-sided in turn 3 at Austria, slightly broke his wrist. He said it was an issue, came out maybe 3 months later. It's been holding me back. It's been an issue. I can't ride the way I am. Frankie said he's back to full fitness, but is he actually? We don't know. The fact that he's that far off, I still have question marks whether it's him or the bike or a mixture of the two. He wasn't that far off in 1920. I can't see the bike changing that much. Davi is in retirement mode, and you have a rookie in Darren Binder who throws that to sceneries but gives it a good effort. So you have 3 riders there that you go, are they really getting the most out of the bike? You go, probably not, no. So you don't know where that Yamaha really is. Because if you look at it with Quartararo, you go, well, yeah, it's a race-winning bike. But then you go, well, Binder is nowhere. Davi is seconds off the base. That bike must be the worst one. That might be a good Moto2 bike on its day. So you're kind of, it's very hard to see. You kind of have to look through between the lines of where exactly that Yamaha is at. But regardless of how good the bike is, there's no question that Quartararo is going to be a multiple world champion in his career, and he's going to go on to do many great things in the sport.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just look at him. He's absolutely fantastic. He's popular with the fans as well. You know, he's going to be like that next superstar after Marquez. He's sort of the new guy coming in, you know, replacing Marquez while he's sort of out and injured, and, you know, kind of probably towards the end of his career now, if, you know, the way things are going for Mark. It'd be nice to see him back, and hopefully he does stick around for a bit longer, but, you know, it does seem like he's probably sort of Marquez sort of on his way out, and it's Fabio Quartararo coming in next. But the Yamaha debate, of course, is very interesting. We could talk about it quickly, I suppose, like you were saying with the bike. It is very difficult to place where it is, because some weekends it's amazing. I think the thing is that Fabio rides it in such a strange way, the others just cannot get their head around. Morbidelli, I definitely think he's not full fitness, but also at the same time, I feel like the development just keeps going further and further away from the Morbidelli, Rossi, Viñales riding style on that bike towards the guy that's winning the races. And why not? You know, I suppose you may as well develop it that way. And obviously you've got Dovi struggling. He can't figure out how to ride the bike. Again, he probably rides it in that same similar way. I mean, they're all pretty close on track with the Yamahas. So I'd say almost that like their riding styles, that's the max you can get out of that bike. So yeah, it is one of those things. It's hard to pinpoint. It just seems like if you're behind several bikes, you can't do a lot. Whereas Quartararo is either at the front or behind a couple of bikes and can just slowly pick them off. Whereas if you're behind 10, 15 bikes, that's it. You're absolutely done. But I did just mention that Maverick Vinales, obviously former Yamaha rider. We'll talk about him this weekend because what a race he was having. He was having an amazing race. He was up behind Aleix. He looked quicker than Aleix Espargaro. Aleix actually was in his way, I think, to be honest. As far as I was concerned, it looked like it looked like Vinales could have been on course for his potential first podium on the Aprilia. Miller was there. It looked like Miller maybe could have had him, but if he'd got past Aleix, we saw how long it took Miller to do so. If he'd managed to get past Aleix, I definitely could have seen Vinales on that podium today, which would have been amazing to see. It'd have been really nice to see him do well on that Aprilia. But unfortunately, his ride height device stuck on. It was a very, very dangerous incident. We've seen it happen a couple of times now. So obviously it's happened to Vinales today, happened to Binder back in Mandalika, happened back to Morbidelli, I think at the start of 21, if I'm not mistaken, at Qatar. I think that happened to him. So these ride height devices are a little bit interesting. Really unlucky, though, for Maverick Vinales because he had to completely retire. You could see he couldn't turn in. So it was quite dangerous. It does probably bring into question whether the ride height devices should be allowed because it's pretty clear that if they fail, it could be quite a dangerous result because Maverick nearly fell off. He lost the front going into the corner he tipped into because he just had completely different ride height than he should have done. So yeah, a little bit dangerous and just really unfortunate for Vinales there.
Yeah, I'm going to start off with the ride height device. I think they should be banned at the end of the season for multiple reasons. One, MotoGP, they have no correlation to a road bike. You're not going to get a brand new R1 with a ride height device. The same way that in Formula 1, you're not going to have active suspension in a normal road car. The correlation, there's just no need for it. It's just a weird gimmick that has made these shape-shifting motorbikes quicker, but it doesn't have any development for the real world. Two, they're overstressing the tyres. Michelin have said that they have put a lot more load on the tyres by having these aero, these ride height devices, shape-shifters, whatever you want to call him. Again, the tyres being called into question of that's why they can't race. It's more down to the fact that they're putting too much load through the tyres. That's why the temperature's spiking and then they can't race each other as much. I reckon if we got rid of all the ride height devices, the shapeshifters, maybe keep them for the start if that was the thing. But even then, you go, well, what if it sticks on? My opinion, I think it's just best to get rid of them completely. As a safety aspect, of course, it did happen to Frankie last year. It did happen to Binder in the wet. He somehow managed to get a P7 out of that. That is still an unbelievable ride. How we managed to get a chopper around that Mandalika circuit, I'll never know. And then today, you could see it coming into the corner. I think it's turn 9, I believe. Turn 8, turn 9. Downhill. And it starts to rise as you get towards the corner. You could see the rear of the bike was just completely squatted down. He came in, the front tucked. He did very well to save it. It carried on. He looked like looked from the first few seconds, he looked shook. You were kind of going, what's going on here? Does he have a problem? Because that's usually they make a mistake within 0.3 of a second. They're back on it. It doesn't affect him. Whereas Maverick seemed like he was kind of really shook by it. It was a weird one. Obviously, finding out then in a couple of laps later he had a problem. But then there was a picture of him coming into the Saxon curve, the penultimate corner, where he was trying to sit the bike up and brake aggressively to get it to disengage. It was literally stuck down the whole time. And he came into the pit and the back of the bike was just completely sagged down. And end of race. Podium was definitely on the cards. Now, whether he would have been able to make the medium last the whole race, him and Quartararo were on the medium rear to get a better start, but they didn't think they'd last the distance. Quartararo did say that over the whole race, it did drop off more than he expected. Now, Maverick has been known for being exceptional on his tyres, for being arguably one of the best people in the last third of the race on tyres. So, if he could have maybe got ahead of Aleix, I reckon podium definitely, because he seemed to have a lot more pace. He got up to the back of Aleix quite quickly, then kind of sat there, couldn't really get past him, and then Miller caught them about half a second a lap, and we were kind of robbed of a bit of a battle because Maverick then drifted off into the pit lane, And then we had the two fighting for third, but I would like to see Maverick in there in the battle for the front. We haven't seen much of Maverick on screen just because he's been usually outside the top 10. But promising signs because he made up positions off the launch for the first time in God knows how long.
Yeah, I remember seeing him on the first lap and I was like, oh, Maverick, he hadn't dropped back for once. I mean, it's one of those things where for him, it's really big, like in his head. We've seen it in the past where, if he's feeling good, he'll perform well. So hopefully he takes this as a boost of confidence and we can see him, up there a bit more. It's always nice to see riders up there. It'd be great to see two Aprilias up there as well because, great as it is to see Aleix up there, and I'm really happy whenever he is up there. It always just feels like, if they just had two bikes up there, perhaps they could do a bit more and they'd be even more competitive in this championship. And, Maverick could always play a role later on. If he's up there, he could play a role in the championship. He could finish second behind, Aleix if Fabio's third or something and, just take more points off. So to have two Aprilias up there would be really good to see. Somebody else that's been flying, somebody that flew under the radar a little bit, though, and has been flying under the radar the last few races is Johann Zarco, really. Another second place for him. That's 2 in a row now, and top Ducati in the championship. So, to be honest, everyone's saying who should get the factory bike, Martin or Bastianini. It really should be Zarco at this rate because look at him. He's, again, just like last year, really. He's just there or thereabouts. He's not winning any races, but he's second, third, fourth, fifth. He's never crashing particularly either. So, yeah, another good result from Zarco. I've got to say, I'm quite impressed with the guy. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it's his 10th second place in MotoGP, which is a pretty resounding stat if you think about it. He's finished second 10 times and he's yet to win one. He's come close many times. At the current rate, he came 5th, 4th, 3rd, and then 2nd today. If that's to continue, he'll win an Assen, which would be a brilliant one. But again, Assen, Ducati, you wouldn't really think that they're probably best suited to each other. But you never know. You never think they'd be suited well to Sachsenring either, and we had 2 of them on the podium. So what do I know? But Zarco overall has been brilliant this year. He's had a few blips, but he's been ultra consistent, gone under the radar, gets very little media attention. He's always in Q2. He's always thereabout. He doesn't crash much. He just gets the job done. And he's going to get another 2 years with Pramac, and he at least deserves that. But I actually wouldn't mind throw him into the factory team. Give Bastianini, give Martin another 2 years on a satellite bike. Make them wait, get them experience, get them winning races before they get the full factory team. Because we've seen in the past having 2 young riders going at the title together in a factory team doesn't always work. So having someone a bit older, a Petrucci, a Jack Miller, a Zarco in the team, it can always be a good thing for the team. I believe having someone slightly older. If you look at for Formula 1, for reference, Sergio Perez in Red Bull, he's done a brilliant job of being a number 2. So I reckon Zarco would have been a good fit for that team. He brings the bike home. He would have been good for the team's championship. And overall, he's just an ultra consistent rider and doesn't get the praise he deserves.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually a good start, though. The 10 times second place. That does feel bad for him. But honestly, I'm sure he'll take it because really a couple of years ago, his MotoGP career was almost over after the KTM. He got the lifeline with the Vintia. And yeah, it's really good to see that he still continued after that. But we'll move on to the other podium rider, the other Ducati rider on the podium, Jack Miller. Got to say, pretty good performance from him because he had a long lap penalty in the race and he still managed to put it on the podium. And that doesn't happen too often. So I'll give a round of applause in my head, I'll give a round of applause for Jack Miller because, yeah, good ride, really. Obviously, he got the long lap penalty for crashing under a yellow flag, big no-no. But it's one of those things. It does happen sometimes. I mean, sometimes they crash without pushing. It can happen. So, it's one of those things. I think he probably was pushing. So, bit naughty. So he rightfully got a penalty. For once, the stewards got it right. Or we'll give them that because that's consistent with what they've been given to other people for crashing under a yellow flag. And they actually penalised somebody. So that's always a good start for the stewards to actually give penalties out. But yeah, it was a good ride for Miller. Got to say, quite impressive in the way he sort of hunted down the Aprilia riders as well, because he was right behind. In fact, he was just in front of Viñales when he took his long lap. So he would have lost basically 3 seconds to Viñales. Although I'm not so sure that the long lap at Sachsenring is worth that much because you actually just run wide, basically. It's definitely, I don't think it's 3 seconds particularly, but even still, he almost crashed actually in the long lap as well because there's lots of gravel in there from Jean Meer's crash at turn 1. So Miller quite lucky there, but great ride from him.
Yeah, he actually said he's changed his position on the bike after the Barcelona test. He said he's a bit more kind of overall more weight on the front, and he said he's more comfortable like that. Obviously made the mistake on crashing under yellow, and obviously did deserve the penalty. In the race though, like you said, he has a scary moment coming into the long lap. He just touches the gravel, he has to pick the bike up, but I definitely agree that it's not 3 seconds, because it is essentially like you're running wide. Now you might lose 2 seconds because you have to kind of brake and you have to make sure you take it slow and stuff, but I don't think it's anywhere near a 3 second loss. Overall though, in a race that you go hot temperatures, edge of the tyre, spinning, you go, Jack Miller's going to eat his tyres there. He's going to be nowhere. He's going to drop back towards the last half of the race. And he didn't. He just kept coming forward, caught the two pretty as like there was no tomorrow. And then the whole, well, obviously when Maverick retired, then he was straight behind the Leish. And he looked like he could turn the bike more. He could brake later and get out of the corners better. If there was any other track, he probably would have blasted past him within 2 or 3 laps. But of course, Sachsenring, being the tight, twisty car park that it is, just held his progress slightly. He made a couple of speculative moves into turn 1, both times nearly ran off track, and then eventually kind of dummied Leish into a move. Leish just got it skipping on the kicker and ran on, and that was P2 or P3, sorry, pretty much sewn up for Miller. He had the pace, and he was deserving, because again, if he could have just got the move done, he would have cleared off in his own pace. So it was probably the right thing to happen that he got through. But into the crowd after the race, actually, there was a sign put up, I think it was Saturday morning, if someone would swap him for a teacher for his gloves. And in fairness, he did actually do it. Gave him a small burnout, threw the gloves into the crowd, and back to the Parc Ferme after that, back up the hills. But he is off to KTM. I don't know if we've covered that since the last episode. He has signed for KTM. It is official, the factory team. And KTM have gotten a serious rider on the hands. He mightn't be a world champion, but he's definitely a top GP rider. And he will come into his own on a KTM, I believe.
Yeah, I think he'll probably work in that environment pretty well. He's been there before, of course. Almost won the Moto3 championship on a KTM, so he knows, knows some of the people in there. Obviously, he knows Guidotti already as well from working with him at Pramac, so he could be quite a good fit for Miller as well. Potentially being, well, I suppose he's going to be the team leader because they're always going to be behind Brad Binder. But being there and knowing that he's wanted and that he's going to help develop the bike, I'm sure that's a good environment for him. He's had his Red Bull connection for a long time as well, so it does all seem to work pretty well for Miller. And it is nice that you say, obviously, he went into the crowd as well earlier, and he went near the crowd and threw his gloves after they saw the signs. It's always a nice touch. It's nice to see when the riders have a little bit of interaction with the fans there. One of the riders I actually want to give a bit of a shout out to, though, is actually Luca Marini. Now, he has flown under the radar because 5th place today. What a good result from... Actually, was it 4th place?
5th.
It was 5th, yes, right, okay. Yes, because he was closing up to Miller and Leish. I was thinking he was closing Miller. I was like, well, I'm sure he finished 5th. I was like, how did that work out? But that's because Leish was between them. But yeah, what a race from Marini. I think he'd had 2 6th places in a row just before that. So he's starting to find some form. The guy really that was in Enea Bastianini's shadow last year, and then this year almost to some extent has been inside Bezzecchi's shadow as well. The nearly man in Moto2, he was fought for the championship, but he was around the paddock. He was in Moto2 a long time. He was kind of competitive for a long time as well, but never quite made that step. But nice to see the younger brother of Valentino doing pretty well there on the Valentino Rossi bike as well. So good race from Marini. I think he definitely deserves a shout out for that one.
He's another one actually that I don't know if it was a Jerez test or Barcelona test, but they found something with the front end of the bike. He's more confident braking and more comfortable. And again, it's there's so little test time in MotoGP, in modern day MotoGP, that these one-day tests every now and then people find so much because they don't have time during a weekend to try something with the setup. They don't have time to try radical setup changes, try different riding styles, there's just so much you can try on a bike, and you really don't have time. If you think about it, you have 2 hours of a Friday, you have an hour Saturday morning, and then you're into qualifying in FP4, so you're kind of, there's not much, you kind of spend the first hour getting kind of drilled in with the track, getting your head around it, then you have an hour to maybe set up the bike, and then you're pretty much into sessions where you have to perform. There's no chance of tinkering with the bike. We'll try a different preload. We'll try stick the front wheel out. There's none of that. You're just going, right, stick softs in, low fuel, and belt away and see what we can do. And then you have the race. So it's really, if you think about it, they have so little time during a race weekend to try anything new. So these 1 day tests where they have 8 hours on track and they can get like 6, 7, 80 laps in, they can just do so much and they can learn so much that it shows with Miller finding a new position on the bike, Marini finding a new front end suspension setup or something, whatever. They haven't told us exactly, but all he knows is he's better on the braking, he's a bit more consistent. And it shows he's had 2 very good results. He was on the front row in Mugello, got a good top 6 there. Then again today, if there was a few more laps, he probably could have got a Leish. So brilliant. And again, he was passed on the last lap by a Leish last week after his mare after missing the flag. So brilliant result. He is bringing home solid points for his team and showing that Ducati is working well in most tracks.
Yeah, definitely a good point you mentioned about the Ducati working well. The GP22 definitely seems like the bike to have compared to the GP21 now. That was obviously a discussion we had throughout the season in the early races. Obviously, Bastianini looking good on it. I mean, so was Bezzecchi. And to be honest, Digi Antonio, another rider that probably deserves a little bit of a shout out. He's definitely improved since that Catalonia test as well. So, yeah, I think the GP22 looks like the better bike now, especially at this track. It just seemed like it turned a lot better. But we'll move our attention to the next race then. The Dutch TT, probably the most famous, the most prestigious track on the calendar. You know, it's up there with Mugello, the tracks that everyone wants to win at Assen. Everyone wants to say they've won the Dutch TT. It could be a very interesting race because the Ducati looks like it turns. Quartararo goes well there. The Aprilia looks pretty good. So I'm going to turn to you and say, what are your predictions for the next round? Who do you think is going to be fighting for the win? What might we see at the next race?
I hope I don't curse him, but I'm putting all my money on Quartararo. I reckon he'll not walk it, because that's unfair to say that he'll walk it, but I reckon he'll have a kind of a Marquez weekend where throughout all the weekend he looks strongest, and then in the race might have a small bit of advantage and he can just manage the race. If you think about it, it's high corner speeds. There's not massive long straights. You come out of the turn 5, the hairpin, you have a bit of a straight there. There's a kink, it goes into a fast corner, so it's not a heavy braking zone at the end. You have the home straight, which you come out of a chicane. So again, there's not many places on track we go, oh, they're going to eat him alive for power. It's all to do with your flow, your rhythm, and that's where Quartararo is just second to none at the moment. So I'm going to say comfortably, confidently, touching wood, it'll be Quartararo for the victory. For the rest of the weekend, I'll have to go Leish again. He looks strong everywhere, so you can't really go against him at the moment. And hopefully Maverick. I hope Maverick is up there again. Maybe he takes a bit of solace from his strong performance. Like, we forgot to actually mention that when he did retire, he got off the bike, kind of a small drop at head, like, oh, what can you do? Fist bumping all his mechanics. He could kind of see in his body language, he's like, look, I was battling for the podium. I didn't crash. It was a mechanical. What can you do? We're there. We're getting progress. So I think he is in a better mental state than he's been in the last 3 years or so. So he's gone well Assen before. He was P2 there last year after finishing last in Sachsenring last year on a Yamaha. So he definitely can ride around there. I reckon he could have a good weekend. I'm hoping he does. So we're going to go with the 2 Aprilias and Quartararo for the podium. No Ducatis nowhere.
There you go then. That's probably a good shout because, yeah, Quartararo have been amazing there last 2 races because I don't think they raced there in 2020, did they? So in 21, obviously he won that race. In 19, he was up there battling. And guess who won that race? Maverick, I believe, won that race, did he not? So, yeah, it was Maverick, always pretty good at Assen. So those two, definitely a good shout. Leish, pretty confident everywhere. So, yeah, I got to say, I don't really see anybody else on the podium. I definitely agree with what you say there. The Ducatis, maybe, because they are turning a little bit better. But I guess we'll have to find out. But hopefully you have enjoyed this edition of the Motogp Xtra podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, do drop the video a like. Or if you're on Spotify, do rate it 5 stars, as it does help us out in the algorithm. I've been Rhys. I hope you have enjoyed it. And we'll see you in the next episode.